A transformational time in my life was during junior high when a teacher decided to put his attention on me and just speak life, speak life, speak life. And that actually ended up bearing fruit later on in my life.
But sometimes in our life, we don't have a figure like this. And sometimes we might feel without hope, no one to lead us and guide us. But in this episode, we want to talk about how God is doing that in your life today and how there is hope for you.
That and more in the next 10 minutes on The Move.
Today's episode is brought to you by Logos. Learn more about the world's best Bible study software at logos.com/themove. We're going to John chapter 6, verses 1 through 15.
Yes, and the question is, have you read it? And if you need to read it, it's in the description below. We're going to put 10 minutes on the clock. As always, we're going to start that in 3, 2, 1, go.
So I read that this is the only story that's in actually all 4 of the Gospels.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool to see the different emphases of different gospel writers and why they include what and what they don't include. And we know that John's got a specific point here because we've been seeing this emerge over and over and over, that John is very intentional about what he includes, what he doesn't, even just down to the very language of what he uses, right?
Yeah, what have you found?
What have we found?
What have you found in this story?
Well, we're going to talk about that.
Okay,
That's the whole point about this.
Yeah. Please, do share.
So I think one of the cool things is that Jesus is still coming out as who he is. And what's interesting is at the end of this story, you see the people wanting to take Jesus by force to make them their king.
Yeah.
Which you would think is kind of like a good thing, because up to this whole point, Jesus is revealing himself as the very embodiment of what all the laws has been pointing towards. And yet, Jesus does something really interesting. Rather than accept the honor and the admiration, the kingship that everyone wants to thrust on him, he actually withdraws away and hides away.
Yeah. And it seems as though in doing that, he's signaling that it's almost as though, you ever watch Friends?
I've watched Friends.
You watch Friends? One of my favorite Friends episode is Ross, Chandler, and Joey are moving a sofa.
Pivot!
Yeah, exactly.
Pivot!
Yeah, where my man Ross like, pivot. You seen that episode,
Yes.
right?
It's one of the classics.
Yes, and I feel like this is
Jesus is pivoting.
yeah,
here.
Jesus is pivoting here. There's
They're
a
all
move.
like, "Hey, Jesus!"
Yeah,
it's like,
wait,
whoa.
It's like pivot, right? and the pivot is that he's gone into the heart. I mean, it's a hard pivot too. He's gone into the heart of Jerusalem, right? And he has stood up and said, "I am he you've been looking for. It's me." All of the elements that have been orbiting around him at the end of chapter 5, he takes them all. He's like, me, right? And then at the beginning of chapter 6, notice that he's in Galilee.
Yeah.
Boom! He was in the south. Now he's in the north in Galilee. And he's by the Sea of Tiberias, again, another body of water. And what's interesting to me is that the large crowd, they're following him because of the signs.
Yeah, so they're actually following him for the wrong reasons.
So this is already clear.
Jesus is highlighting, this is the reason why you would follow me, because there's testimony here, there's testimony here, there's testimony here. Listen, it's my word that gives me authority.
Yep. But no, they're following because of the
Signs and miracles and wonders that he's doing, how
Which-
he's healing the sick.
which is why he won't give himself over to them at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're trying to grab him, right? Which is in keeping with the end of John chapter 2, where he says he didn't put his trust in man because he didn't give himself over to man, for he knew what was in man, right? And he, in turn, look at verse 4. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at
You
hand.
see that again? There's another callback.
Another callback, right? Lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him. This is similar language to what he told them at the end of the woman at the well. He's like, look up, right? Look at the harvest. But he asked Philip, he said, Philip, where do we buy bread?
Yeah.
Right? Where can we buy bread so that these people might eat? Now, interesting tidbit that you mentioned.
Yeah, is that the reason, perhaps one of the reasons why he asks Philip is because actually Philip happened to be from that region.
Yeah.
So he might have insight as to what's going on.
And then verse 6 tells us he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. And this is where I see a pivot.
Mm-hmm.
That thus far, Jesus has been moving with his disciples with him. They get to see his work. They're trying to figure out what this guy's all about. But his mind is, I'm revealing. I'm going to get all the way to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Let them know what it is.
Yeah.
They don't receive him. And now it seems as though now his attention is pivoting now towards his disciples, as though he's going to pour into them. Like, okay.
Because I think this is where you're going. Jesus sees where this story ultimately goes, and he knows that the story ultimately ends with his demise. And so if this thing is going to continue moving, then he's going to have some people here who really understand what's going on.
Yeah. And it's obvious that the crowd
doesn't get it.
It's also obvious that the religious leaders
don't get it. And when we get to the end of this chapter, we'll also see that it's also clear to Jesus at this point that the disciples, or at least many of the disciples, still don't get it.
And yet it seems as though he's pivoting because now he's going to pour here, right? Even though he's been doing it for some time, but there's this very intentional sort of moving.
You know what I found that was interesting is that why did Jesus choose to ask a question regarding bread?
Yeah.
You know, he could have asked, hey, how do we get them some fish or some meat or something else like that? But there's even here perhaps an intentionality with this bread motif.
About man shall not live by
bread alone.
Bread alone.
Or that his body is in fact the bread, right? We think about the Last Supper as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is going to end up coming back into play in several chapters down the road where he talks about the bread of heaven.
Yeah.
Right? This is a theme that's now...
So if the bread can represent these things, I think it's also really interesting here that Philip answers that 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get even a little. Mm-hmm. That there's no amount of wealth that can actually purchase that which the bread is able to offer. Mm-hmm. That thing that which you're looking for, that completeness, that wholeness, right? Mm-hmm. You can't buy that. Mm-hmm. That's not something that you can ever get. Mm-hmm. There's no amount of money that's even possible for you to even just get a taste.
Now, if this were to happen chronologically, at least the moves to Jerusalem and then they appear in Galilee, if I'm a disciple, I'm feeling as though, okay, you're the one that was promised. We believe that because of John's testimony. We've moved with you all the way to Jerusalem. We've suffered, maybe a little bit of hardship on the way. There's been some questionable moves on your part. The whole Samaritan episode was, I'm not quite so sure, but I'm still with you because we've never seen some guy get healed after 38 years. That was impressive.
Yeah.
But we thought that since you're the one that John spoke of, that you would be accepted, and you have not been. And now we're up here and you're asking us to find 200 denarii worth of bread. Like, it's not happening. Mm-mm. You see what I'm saying? So that it would seem as that the disciples' sort of sentiment might be beginning to wane, and all of a sudden the way he positions himself in relationship to this point of economic abundance, or in their case, economic scarcity, is that even in that, I'm the man.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm the man. So I love Andrew. I don't know why Andrew said this. Why would you even bring it up? You got like hundreds of people in front of you, if not thousands. Well, we got
5 loaves.
5 loaves and these 2 fishes, right? But Jesus like, yeah, have them sit down.
Yeah.
Have them sit down. Watch. Right? And this is, again, why I see this pivot that now he's pouring into his disciples.
And we see this as well because this is how he basically works this miracle. Yeah. There's one sense where he could have just spoken the word and then all the food appears. Yes. But he does speak a word, but the word isn't to the masses this time, it's to the disciples, right? And he tells the disciples to basically distribute all of this food. And then other gospel accounts tell that, the disciples are the ones that are actually handing out the food.
Yes. And then, again, for me, what John's been doing, all these little elements that he leaves, that this impulse feels as though it's about the disciples, that it's now this pivot towards them. Because look at how we conclude this thing, verse 13. So they gathered them and they filled 12.
12 baskets.
And what were the baskets filled with?
Bread.
Bruh.
Bread.
You see what I'm saying?
Bread.
When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. So these 12 baskets are going to get filled, right? They're filled with bread. And he has the 12 with him. He's certainly not being received by the religious leaders down in Jerusalem. So he's going to pour into those that are willing to receive him. The crowd is already dead set on something else. So here. And so you see that, again, this is what I see happening, right? And this strikes me, as far as for me and my Christian walk and my relationship to the Lord, is Jesus' perception in verse 15.
Perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdraws.
Well, it lets you know, so it's not about the crowd for him, right?
He's got the right motive. His motive is to do the work of the one who sent him, is to fulfill that word in his own life. And whatever happens, if that leads to scarcity in his own life, so be it. If it leads to the cross, so be it. If it leads to abundance, so be it. But to be sure, it's not about him.
Yeah. And while he's here, he is going to pour into those who have open hands, open hearts to receive him, right? This is what I see in this story. I mean, that part of it is that he's pivoting to these disciples, positioning himself as the one of abundance, and now he is going to pour himself out on the willing. He'll pour himself out so that they might be the 12 baskets full of bread, right? We're going overtime, just a little bit. Let's go overtime.
Take home.
Yeah. I remember reading John chapter 2 and the six water pots.
Yeah.
Right? If you do a counting of how many disciples were with Jesus, there was 5.
Oh.
The 6th, in some way, you could see as John the Baptist, right? And then he's going to bring wine out of water, these pots, right? This numerical thing going on. But here, his disciples, when you see the 12 and the baskets, and they're full.
Yeah.
Right? He wants to, and I have to ask the question for me, where's the place in my life that either bringing new wine that he wants to fill with bread? Because I believe that the testimony of scripture is that he really has turned his attention on me. Right?
Yeah.
Like the cause of the gospel is now squarely, like the mantle of gospel is squarely on us, not to complete the work, but to keep the completed work going. You hear the difference?
Yeah.
Right? Not to complete the work, but to keep the completed work going, right? To keep working the completed work. And like, man, what is it I'm holding back, or what is it that I have that I think is small, maybe not giving over, that then he turns into something else?
Yeah.
Right?
For me, something that I see is this idea of like, how do I perceive God? And maybe in which way do I get this wrong? You know, these people want to take Jesus by force. Sometimes we try and force God into a box, you know.
Yeah.
These people say, hey, you know, Jesus can heal the lame. He can heal our sick. He can, depends on where this fits in chronologically, he can raise the dead and he can feed an entire army. Like there's nothing that we can't win, nothing that we can't accomplish. And we realize that, no, that's not what Jesus came to do. And so for me, it's seeking the heart of my Father. God, really, what do you want? And maybe where what I want and what you want separate, am I willing to say, okay, God, not my will, but yours instead?
Yeah. And we'll get there to that line, right? But I mean, again, it really seems like he begins to, and we'll see this, he focuses attention. I want to receive that.
Absolutely. Hey movers, I recently got to travel to the Logos headquarters and ended up recording several tutorials on how you and I can get more from our Bible study using Logos. To see the entire playlist of videos, visit logos.com/themove and get 10% off any Logos 8 product you want. logos.com/themove.